Welcome back. There will be some folks joining us as we go. For those of you who are here and listening in, feel free at any point during Ask the Doctor sessions to ask a question in the Q&A section, and we will do our best to get to every question. So this is one I've been waiting for anxiously. One of my dear friends and mentors, and really one of the most inspiring and thoughtful leaders in the end-of-life space, and in my mind in healthcare, is Dr. Ira Byock. Thanks for being here, Doctor.
Michael, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for asking.
Of course. So for those, I'm sure just about everybody on this call knows Ira's work. For those of you who are new to it, he is the founder of the Institute for Human Caring at Providence, one of the largest healthcare systems in the country, has written extraordinary books about end of life and about wellness at end of life and what matters most. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. So Ira, we talk about, or people talk about this term, the good death, which makes many of us who work in this space have an immediate reaction. What is your response to those two words together?
You know, I thought for a long time that the culture reflected by our language tends to commodify, well, everything, but end-of-life experience. And my avoidance of the term good death stems from a few things, but basically it sort of makes it transactional, as if it's we're objectifying it rather than seeing it as a process and reflecting the qualities that I think we are all aiming toward. What I mean is that first of all, a good death conflates dying and death. Dying is a part of living. Notice it's a gerund, right? Death is a noun, and that's part of the commodification. I want that thing, right? And if I could just get that thing, and the other part, and probably my strongest objections, is that it conflates dying, this process and part of living, with death, which is beyond life. It's a lifeless state. And I don't know anything about death. I have frankly yet to meet somebody who convinced me that they knew anything at all about death. I know a bit about dying because for years, like so many people joining us today, I've hung out with people who are seriously ill and dying. I am regularly in contact with people who are seriously ill and dying, even though I'm not actively seeing patients. Right now, I have 3 or 4 people, friends and colleagues who are dealing with serious illness, and we're in discussions about what better care and a better quality of life and a healthy ending would look like for them. Okay. I'm interested, I come at all of this sort of through the lens of a family doc. As you may remember, I was initially trained to be a rural family practitioner, and I kind of approach care that I was providing to people and their families in sort of this life cycle and family cycle conceptual framework. And frankly, I approach my own life in that regard, right? I am the son of Ruthie and Seymour Byock. I am the grandchild of my maternal and paternal grandparents. And beyond that, I'm a Jewish guy. 10,000 ancestors dream of me, right? That covenant, we belong to one another before we were born, and we will belong to others in our community into an open-ended future. Okay, so that's kind of this mindset that I have, and that fits really well within what I learned in developmental psychology, in pediatrics and older adult care, frankly, in family systems theories and all of that stuff. I think it still has utter validity. When I was in clinical practice early on, when still an intern and resident, I noticed that dying people were being cared for in a transactional manner. You treat their pain. If you're lucky, you get to deal with their bowels. And if they die without pain, well, that's as good as we can do. But basically, we, young doctors steeped in the science and technology of clinical therapeutics, felt like we didn't have much to offer, if anything at all. And frankly, when I was being trained, dying people were quite literally down the hole because for their quote unquote privacy, but you got a sense that it was also because it was upsetting. What I learned and what sort of changed my perspective and is relevant to the conversation we're having today is I learned that at least for some people, when we dealt with their pain and their bowels and their major worries, just the basics. Occasionally I would meet somebody who, if I said, Mr. Rodriguez, how are you doing today? Would look me straight in the face and say something along the lines of, I'm well, doctor. How are you? So, at first I didn't know what to think. And I thought, well, it's the morphine, he's a little intoxicated and high, or it's the steroids. I use a lot of steroids, prednisone and decadron and stuff. And that gives you some people euphoria. And so maybe it's the steroids. But I heard that just often enough, not every day, certainly, but just occasionally I'd ask somebody how they were, and they'd evince some sense of well-being that I had to confront my own ideas about human well-being, human development, and what growth looked like through this stage of human life. Like, if I step back and I refuse to pathologize serious illness and dying, then is there human potential that exists even through this waning phase of life? What my clinical experience, my personal experience, and what research I've done has affirmed is that the capacity for human well-being, for human growth and development, and a sense of well-being persists through the very, very end of life. Not for everyone, but that potential is within the human endowment. And so as clinicians, as a doctor, that's where I aim. Can I foster, not just alleviate, prevent and alleviate suffering, but can I also foster human development, allow people to grow individually and together through the end of life? Whew. So, as you know, I use the phrase dying well, where well is not just, well, you did it right. That's fine. But where it's an adjective defining the person who is dying. Can a person die well with a sense of well-being as they leave this life?
Yeah. No, and that's such a powerful distinction. And for really to take away death as this object and dying as this process that we can have agency in is extraordinarily helpful. Now, so we're in the era of well-being and self-care, and what comes to mind might look like yoga and applying a face mask or a spa day. But I suspect well-being has some different pragmatic mandates or opportunities when it comes to dying. So speaking to a caregiver, there are caregivers on the call. We also have professionals on the calls like death doulas and hospice workers. What are some of the ways, from just a basic caregiver and some of ways as a professional, we can maximize the potential of well-being up until the end?
Thanks. There's a lot we can do. First acknowledge that this capacity exists, and aim for it. Don't aim just to alleviate suffering, right? That collectively constricts that human potential, which I think we've done. And maybe we'll come back to this because I think we're going to talk about what's stopping us or what's standing in our way. But we have to acknowledge that at least within the human endowment, there is this potential for well-being. Then, one has to do the basics. People have to be sheltered from the elements, clean and dry, right? They need to be warm. They need to be treated in a way that acknowledges that they are a whole person, not just a person with a bowel obstruction in room 312, or who I'm going to be seeing today at home. They have to be seen as somebody who has feelings, who has other people are important to them, has a sense of meaning in their life, a sense of connection to something larger than themselves, whether they use the term God or nature or family that will live on for generations to come. They do have to have their symptoms managed, because while I am here asserting that this is a human experience, a personal experience for individuals and families, if somebody is writhing in pain, it's not their experience is fully biological, medical, and the personal is being excluded because of the severity of their suffering. Beyond that, I have written and worked a lot to illuminate the tasks of life completion, that we're not just ending a life, we're completing a life. We're making sure that our affairs are in order, business and legal affairs. This is pretty structural, but hey, it matters to people, because otherwise people can worry that they haven't made the arrangements so that their families are going to be left with bills to pay, or not knowing how to get into their bank accounts, or not being able to close their Facebook account or whatever. So you have to do that kind of clerical stuff of preparation if you wish, but there's a more tender, intimate part of life completion. It's making sure that there's nothing critically important left unsaid between you and people you love. I've written a lot about saying the four things: the please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. It's pretty standard, and it's as close to a one size fits all as I can think of in healthcare, because we matter to one another, and no relationship is perfect, right? Almost every close and loving relationship, whether it be between parents and children, or spouses or siblings, or the closest of friends, usually have some history of friction or hurt feelings, sometimes real transgressions. So please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you is stating the obvious. But I know that helps people feel like their relationship is complete, even if it doesn't change, it doesn't end. You don't have to wait till you're on death's door to say those four things. You can keep your relationship complete, like a circle is complete if it's unbroken, right? Refresh it. And I can tell you that I've done this exercise with, my own family, with my kids and my spouse, my sister, did it with my mom, thankfully, before she died suddenly. When a relationship is complete, it's just a little lighter, right? If people know that you screwed up in the past, and you really are regretful, and you have asked for their forgiveness, and if they've given you their forgiveness, something just intimate and honest happened between you that builds relationship. I'm a guy who has to apologize occasionally because I continue to screw up in relationships. I mean, not always, and it certainly made me more sensitive, but it's not a one and done necessarily. So there's that. There's also telling your story, telling stories of your early years, to, doing one of those family heritage workbook things. I mean, I have grandsons now who, aren't tired of hearing me tell those stories, or have never heard those stories. And at some point, they're going to be interested in what Zumpa was like when he was growing up, and who his friends were, and what he did, and all that stuff. There's a chance to, in telling one's stories, one reaffirms one's relationship to others and to life and your goals. Part of the person you have to forgive in life is yourself, because you screwed up, embarrassed yourself shamefully, maybe at times, but you also mundanely may not have reached your lifelong goals. So there's that. And then for me, one of the sort of developmental landmarks is to, and task work too, is to honor and celebrate one's life and relationships. Here's where one's individual development and family development intersect. Right? We know we matter to one another. Can we honor and celebrate life and relationships before we leave this life? Again, these are pretty tangible, achievable goals for many, many people. You don't have to be a meditator or a fully enlightened being to die with a sense of well-being. And it matters not only to the person leaving this life, but when somebody dies well and there's nothing critically important left unsaid, the grieving of those they leave behind definitely tends to be lighter. Grief gets really heavy with the would-haves, could-haves, what-ifs, oh, should-haves, wish I had said this, that, never was forgiven, never was acknowledged, never heard dad say, I love you. Those stuff, that stuff we can address and offer people, protecting their potential to grow individually and together and die well. Sorry for being so long-winded, but this is all possible, and it doesn't take a terminal degree to foster this and help people along. This is achievable.
Yeah, I mean, your work has inspired in me that to just see the end of life phase as the area where there's the potential for the most healing, which is is a huge shift, because we see it as a state of decline, but I actually now see it and have coached so many people to like, here's your opportunity to do some amazing healing. The hero's journey can happen right now. But you lay out a lot of things that are available to us, and some things that potentially aren't yet. What is standing in the way of dying well, and what can we do individually? A lot of that you've already indicated. What's immediately available and accessible to us, and what's going to take more social, political, cultural shift?
Well, there's been countercurrents in the evolution, social and cultural evolution of how we approach the end of life in America today. Look at us. We have death doulas with us. We have hospice people. There's 5,000 hospice programs across the country. Half of or more of American deaths are touched by hospice care. We have full professorships in hospice and palliative medicine, and textbooks and fellowships, and on and on. We have, oh my gosh, we have psychedelic therapies and research going on in use of psilocybin-assisted therapies to help people to achieve some sense of healing or well-being who are facing a life-limiting illness. All of that is amazing. And for so many people in this country, there is an openness to acknowledge that all about dying is not pathological, that this conversation we're having about well-being is possible. All of that's fabulous, and I don't want to diminish the importance of that social and cultural maturation. On the other hand, we have the profit motive. in healthcare and in social services even, and it's commodifying everything. And I think hospice is being devastated, frankly, by the for-profit invasion of hospice care, the wholesale adoption. And I want to I always say this to be clear, it's not for-profit in and of itself. I know some fabulous, wholly owned, family-owned for-profit hospice programs. I'm not speaking of them, but the vast majority of for-profit hospice programs are investor-owned, meaning they're traded on Wall Street. People buy them with their money and rightfully expect a return on their investment. And now they're even private equity owned, which is just trying to flip programs in a time to get their equity investment back in a reasonably short period of time. This is really commodifying hospice care, and I'm seeing the staffing ratios and productivity pressures, and oh my gosh, and the terrible lack of our abilities to treat symptom urgencies in the home, and the fact that doctors in hospice care rarely see patients, all of standing in our way. I think these days, actually a relative few hospice programs would adopt or could legitimately say they embrace this notion of trying to hold human potential through the end of life, allowing people to complete their lives and to grow and develop. Mostly they're trying to make sure they don't suffer, keep them out of the hospital, and serve as many people as possible. And they're actually serving them for less than a week, the large proportion of them. So I think the profit motive is erosive to our higher values, and what to do about it. First, don't lose your outrage. What's happening now, what's happening in the time in which we're living, this era we're living through, is a capacity, the potential of reclaiming the end of life as part of our human endowment, of our ability to be well and to live fully as individuals and families and in communities. That human potential is our endowment, whether you say it's God-given or we're just, nature has offered us as human beings this ability. And it can be squandered. I mean, there is great pressure, usually backed by the profit motive, to see us all as just entities to be we're just Medicare customers to be served, rather than human beings to be served in their fullness. Whole persons.
Yeah, so if somebody wanted to focus energy and attention and resources directly at what you're talking about, what are some of the activities you would suggest?
Well, in your own practices or in your own families or social networks, aim higher than just relief of comfort, relief of stress and distress. Aim for life completion and a sense of well-being. I've written a lot about sort of task work and what you can do for people, but I think we have to these days advocate for people. Make sure that that your needs are being met. Make sure if you've got a bad diagnosis, or a family or friend has gotten a bad diagnosis, get a second opinion, get a third opinion. Go travel if you have the capacity and need to see multiple treatment specialists. But at some point, make sure that one of those opinions is with a hospice a palliative care team that might see and serve you concurrent with whatever it is, your heart treatments or your cancer treatments or whatever. Secondly, make sure that your affairs are in order to the extent that you're empowering those who love you to speak for you if you were unable to speak for yourself. And third, think about what would be left undone if the person you love, or if it's yourself, you were to die suddenly? What would be left unsaid? What would be left undone? Get that stuff done now. You don't have to wait till the disease progresses. Get it done, and allow yourself the chance to feel a little lighter, because at least the things that would worry you have been completed.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to go to a couple, those are great operating instructions and opportunities. We're going to go to some of the questions. There's a question from a Providence physician about psychedelics and psilocybin related, but we're going to push that to next week because Anthony Bossis will be here.
I would just say, I just say, stay tuned, because we're working through this in Providence. It's been slowed by the pandemic and other priorities, but there's substantial interest, and we're working on it.
Great. And that's to bring psychedelic medicine into
to research. We'd like to open ourselves to research. There's a lot to work through, but there's not resistance really. There's real interest, and we want to do it carefully.
Great. We'll go to this question from Judy Flickinger. She says, in my 38 years of hospice work, physicians are still not referring patients early enough. Is there, thoughts on that? Is there work that can be done?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of work has to be done on both sides, but I think right now that hospice is not an attractive referral. That if we in hospice care haven't fixed the hospice Medicare benefit, which is still an either or benefit. You can either get treatments for your disease, let's say it's cancer or end stage heart failure, that may help you live longer and might also make you more comfortable. Or if you're ready to give up your treatments, you can go to hospice care. That's a terrible choice, and it's very, very difficult to know when to counsel people to make that choice. What we should have been doing for a long time is looking at concurrent care, where you get your hospice care for your comfort, your quality of life, your family support, and you can still pursue disease treatments to the extent that they might be of benefit to you. But once you know that hospice team that was treating you concurrently, it makes it a lot easier to move from one path to another organically, rather than that abrupt choice. That it's a difficult choice. Yes, doctors are still resistant to referring, but we in hospice care haven't made it easier. We've made it, if anything, harder.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think hopefully you fired up a lot of people to do some life completion, to think about how they can be an active agent in dying well, and then also to completely transform our healthcare system.
It's still possible. That's the thing. I'm still in this. I'm working with the Institute for Human Caring at Providence. I invite people to Google us, the Institute, and I have my own website with articles and all that. But I'm still in this because it's still possible to actually transform healthcare. On November 1st, we're doing a conference. The Institute's holding an online conference, and it's cheap and will wow you. And it's about the personalizing care in a transactional world. We're talking about authentic, not BS, authentic healthcare transformation.
Yeah. And for those of you interested in that conference, check out EOL. EOL will be sharing about it on our social channels, as well as you can find it at the Institute for Human Caring. And we're at time, and I would love to talk to you all day, but you're a very busy man. Tune in before we say goodbye to Dr. Ira Byock. Just some folks coming up. Our friend Dr. Anthony Bossis is next week. We're going to be hearing from Adrian Boise, Sunita Puri, Lucy Kalanithi, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but an extraordinary, Tracy Gaudet as well. So some great folks coming up in the weeks ahead. Ira, thank you so much for your time. It is always such a pleasure and honor.
Such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right, everyone. Have a great Tuesday. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.